Order, please. Before we begin with the daily routine, the subject of this evening's late debate was submitted by the Honourable Member for Halifax-Clayton Park. Therefore, it be it resolved that the Nova Scotia Government immediately address the potential closure of the Cape Breton Fosse Museum and with consultation will implement a long-term strategy to ensure its continued success. And I look forward to this debate at the close of regular business today. We'll now commence with the daily routine. Presenting and reading petitions. Presenting reports of committees. The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, as Chairman of the Private and Local Bills Committee, I am directed to report that the committee has met and considered the following bills. Bill number 102, an act to authorize the Village of Pugwash to make grants or contributions to certain organizations. And Bill number 105, an act to authorize the Village of Pugwash to make a capital grant to the Pugwash District Volunteer Fire Department. And the committee recommends these bills to the favorable consideration of the House without amendments.
Order that these bills be referred to the Committee of the Whole House on Bills. Tabling reports, regulations, and other papers. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to table a paper which is a response to a question which was asked 2 days ago regarding Maple Leaf employees.
The response is tabled. Statements by ministers. Government notices of motion. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess I better not touch that, but I'd probably pick up my voice, I think, okay. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas on March the 19th, 2007, Nova Scotia Archives launched a new website, novascotiagenealogy.com, that contains a database of 1 million historical birth, marriage, and death registrations in Nova Scotia dating back to 1864. Whereas this new resource makes it possible for anyone interested in researching family history in Nova Scotia to instantly access high-quality digitized images of these original records from anywhere in the world using the internet. And whereas the popularity of this new resource has exceeded all expectations, with more than 16,000 site visits, almost 750,000 page views, and an average of 300 to 700 people on the site at any time, and all within the first 2 days. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in congratulating the staff at Nova Scotia Archives and Records Management and its many partners on the launch of this wonderful new resource. This is another example, Mr. Speaker, of the province's commitment to providing accessible services to Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Manitoba Justice Minister Dave Chomek met yesterday with Federal Justice Minister Rob Nicholson to discuss changes to the Youth Criminal Justice Act, and whereas the report of the Nunn Commission of Inquiry made several recommendations to strengthen the Youth Criminal Justice Act to better protect the public and support young people, and whereas the Government of Nova Scotia has approached the federal government several times on this issue, and Manitoba is echoing Nova Scotia's call for strengthening the Youth Criminal Justice Act, therefore be resolved all members of this House support Manitoba in their efforts to raise these important issues at the national level. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution, whereas Dr. Tamara Franz Odendahl of Mount St. Vincent University was named one of only 25 winners of the prestigious University Faculty Award from the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of Canada, and whereas the Government of Canada created this national award to increase the representation of women and Aboriginal people in science faculty appointments, and whereas the University Faculty Award will provide safe salary support for up to 5 years as she teaches developmental biology and devotes time to research and training both undergraduates and graduate students. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Dr. Franz Odendahl on winning this award and for being a great role model for any student interested in pursuing an academic career in the sciences. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice, passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister responsible for African Nova Scotian Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the No. 2 Construction Battalion, based in Pictou, Nova Scotia, was Canada's only black battalion during the First World War, and whereas Percy Fenton, a 17-year-old African Nova Scotian resident of Arcadia, Yarmouth County, was a member of that battalion, and whereas the 1914-1919 Victoria Medal was awarded to Mr. Percy Fenton of the No. 2 Construction Battalion, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Mr. Dave Thomas of St. George, Ontario, who has agreed to allow the Black Cultural Centre of Nova Scotia to purchase this important African Nova Scotian artifact for its collection. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia was the first province in Canada to implement a province-wide, fully integrated 911 emergency phone system, and whereas the Emergency Management Office, led by Mr. Mike Myatt, the Director of Emergency Services and 911, recently completed a seamless technology transfer to upgrade our 911 system, and whereas Premier Rodney MacDonald and I were pleased to thank the team members at a reception at the Maritime Museum of the Atlantic. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate Project Leader John McManus, Alliant Communications, and KML Technologies, who work together to complete this important public safety initiative. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. Just note before we proceed, in reading any resolutions, we're not supposed to use the actual names of a member in a statement. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the province is committed to increasing the Crown land base by acquiring more coastal lands and wilderness areas and to conserve and protect them from development. And whereas Cape Split is a well-known and well-used area of Nova Scotia and is one that offers unique access to the natural phenomena of the Bay of Fundy, and whereas several landowners at Cape Split have agreed to sell their land to the Crown, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House thank Vera Steele, Blaine and Irene Huntley, Candace Stevenson, Kathy McGrudge, Jemmy and Edgar Thorpe, and Howard MacDonald for helping to conserve and protect these lands for future generations of Nova Scotians. And Mr. Speaker, I request a waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Earltown native Julie Bailey is one of 15 recipients of the Environmental Careers Organization Canada Student Awards, and whereas Julie Bailey is a graduate student at Nova Scotia Agricultural College, and her research utilizes a survey to identify the interest in and potential for energy efficiency upgrades and renewable energy alternatives through energy audits of Nova Scotia farmers. And whereas Julie Bailey received $1,000 and will have the opportunity to showcase her work at Americana 2000, an environmental technology trade show and conference being held in Montreal in March, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly extend congratulations to Julie Bailey on being named a winner of the Environmental Career Organization Canada Student Award and wish her the best of her studies and future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice passed without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister responsible for the Emergency Measures Organization.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Emergency Management Office conducts valuable training sessions across Nova Scotia from municipal, provincial, federal, and private sector employees. And whereas Acadia University partnered with EMO recently to host a 3-day course in basic emergency management. And whereas by all accounts from Acadia staff, students, and EMO trainers, this was a very successful training program in an outstanding facility. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House acknowledge the participation of Acadia University and continue to support the expansion of emergency management training to communities across Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of African Nova Scotian Affairs.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas African Nova Scotian teacher, lawyer, and activist Hobartson Augustus James Whitterburn passed away on February 25, 2007 at the age of 77, and whereas Gus Whitterburn was widely admired for his charismatic leadership and desire to create an equal and just society, which led him to be involved in a variety of key organizations and initiatives during his lifetime. And whereas a few of those include being the founding member of the Nova Scotia Human Rights Commission, the Black Cultural Centre for Nova Scotia, and the former Black United Front. He also provided leadership in the Black Educators Association and the Africville Relocation Committee. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House join me in a moment of silence honouring the accomplishments and the passing of Mr. Gus Whitterburn. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? Agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. I'll rise for a moment of silence. Thank you. Please be seated. The Honourable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the province is committed to increasing its Crown land base by acquiring more coastal lands and wilderness areas and to conserve and protect it from development, and whereas the George Eddy Company has agreed to sell to the Crown its land along the St. Mary's River in Guysborough County, and whereas the land will help ensure the protection of habitat for wood turtles and salmon along the St. Mary's River and will preserve and enhance wildlife, recreational uses, and ecological well-being of the area, as well as add to the Crown land base and consolidate adjoining Crown lands, therefore be it resolved that all members of this House thank the George Eddy Company for helping to conserve and protect these lands for future generations of Nova Scotians. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. Introduction of bills. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity.
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act Respecting Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity.
Bill 146, entitled An Act Respecting Environmental Goals and Sustainable Prosperity.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy standards.
The Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy standards.
Bill 147, entitled an act to amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy standards.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce a bill entitled An Act to Amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 2000, the Employment Support and Income Assistance Act.
The honourable member for Dartmouth North begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 2000, the Employment Support and Income Assistance Act.
Bill 148, entitled an act to amend Chapter 27 of the Acts of 2000, the Employment Support and Income Assistance Act.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The honourable leader of the Liberal Party.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce an act to amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy providers.
The honourable leader of the Liberal Party begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy providers.
Bill 149, entitled an act to amend Chapter 25 of the Acts of 2004, the Electricity Act, respecting renewable energy providers.
Ordered that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Mr. Speaker, before I introduce this bill, I beg leave to introduce someone in the gallery.
Please do.
Brendan Haley and Jennifer Graham from the Ecology Action Centre are here in the Speaker's gallery, and Raymond Plurd. And I'd like to thank them on behalf of the legislature for the tremendous amount of work they've done for the environment, especially on coasts and energy issues. Thank you.
Welcome to the House.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce this bill and an act to declare the Sable Island horse to be the provincial horse of Nova Scotia. It's nice to see he's going to have support on the other side.
I'm hearing oh nay nay, nay nay, my friend. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel begs leave to introduce a bill entitled an act to declare the Sable Island horse to be the provincial horse of Nova Scotia.
Bill 150, entitled an act to declare the Sable Island horse to be the provincial horse of Nova Scotia.
Order that this bill be read for a second time on a future day. Notices of motion. The honourable member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the annual Curl for Cancer event was held on February 23, 2007 in both Pictou and Westville, raising well over $30,000 for cancer research. And whereas the top fundraising team at the New Caledonian Curling Club in Pictou was the Scotiabank team, consisting of George Cameron, Dave Saunders, Craig McDonald, and Carolyn Pearson, who won the Advocate Trophy for raising the most money. And whereas the Curl for Cancer event is a fun night consisting of entertainment, colorful costumes, and of course, curling for a good cause. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate all the organizers, the volunteers, participants, and sponsors who once again made Pictou County's Curl for Cancer a successful event. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the town of Annapolis Royal is one of the smallest incorporated towns in North America and is committed to promoting and preserving the largest concentration of heritage properties in Nova Scotia, and whereas the town was awarded the prestigious Heritage Canada Prince of Wales Prize for its exemplary commitment to heritage preservation within its jurisdiction, and whereas this award, consisting of a metal plaque, a scroll, and a pennant, was created with the support of His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales to encourage and reward sound conservation policy and practice at the municipal level. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the Legislative Assembly join me in extending my congratulations to the town of Annapolis Royal in recognizing heritage conservation as a significant endeavor. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Falmouth District Elementary School, in the midst of frigid temperatures, celebrated their school's outdoor ice rink earlier in February, and whereas school principal Fred McLean, along with the Director of Recreation for the municipality of West Hants, Kathy Keogh, and active students in the school, were all for showcasing the rink as a wonderful place to stay active and enjoy outdoor winter fun. And whereas the showcase promotion was all part of Go for Green, a national initiative designed to take the roof off of winter, while encouraging the development and use of new and existing outdoor rinks in Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House applaud the creative spirit of Falmouth District Elementary School, staff and students, and the municipality of West Hants Recreation Department for getting involved in Go for Green. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas hockey is a healthy pastime for children, both in terms of physical activity as well as a character builder. And whereas tournaments are great forums for allowing young players to test their skills and to meet other players from around the province. And whereas on March 11, 2007, the East Hants Midget AAA Penguins defended their title as provincial champions by winning gold at the provincial tournament held at the East Hants Sportsplex. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the players and coaching staff of the East Hants Midget AAA Penguins hockey team on winning the gold at the provincial tournament and on their accomplishments as repeat champions. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Marlo, Carolina, Joanne, Christine, and Jane are a group of women in Halifax who are extremely angry about Stephen Harper's government's anti-women mandate, so angry that they have started a national campaign to get women involved. And whereas the Women Are Angry campaign has created a website to give women from across the country a place to have their voice heard and get direction as to who they can contact to make a difference. And whereas through their website, thewomenarangry.org, they are working to spread the word of gender inequality and ensuring the voice of women will be heard. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly congratulate Marlo, Carolina, Joanne, Christine, and Jane for taking the initiative and creating this network. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed? I hear a no. The notice is tabled. The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the dedicated members of the Aberdeen Hospital Foundation have changed the face of patient care in Pictou County, and whereas over the last 20 years the foundation has raised more than $6.5 million, spent $9 million on equipment, and now has $21 million in their fund. And whereas in February of this year, the foundation celebrated its tremendous work and how it has improved patient care at Aberdeen Hospital, including its donation of 25% towards the cost of the hospital's new MRI machine. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate the Aberdeen Hospital Foundation and its remarkable achievements. Donations from inside and outside the community it serves has enabled the hospital to provide Pictonians with the best possible care. Hospital foundations across Nova Scotia can be encouraged to follow Aberdeen's lead to ensure the best care for all Nova Scotians. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary-minded, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin with an introduction, if I may.
Please do.
In the West Gallery are three people I'd like to bring to the attention of the House. They're here this afternoon to observe the House and question period. And they are Ashley Kowaleski, Mary Baldwin, and Catherine Lear. And I wonder if the House would welcome them. on the resolution, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Conservative MP Gerald Keddy has stated that his constituents are willing to sacrifice the offshore revenue guarantee in return for other measures in the federal budget. And whereas in Elmsdale on November 9, 2004, Conservative leader Stephen Harper spoke about Paul Martin's intention of breaking a promise to provide provinces with 100% of resource revenue outside the equalization formula. And whereas Mr. Harper stated that if the Prime Minister did not relent, the issue would destroy the Liberal government's political base in Atlantic Canada. Therefore, be it resolved that this House respectfully remind the Prime Minister of his own words: failure to relent on plans to break the promise of an offshore revenue guarantee will destroy his federal government's political base in Atlantic Canada. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver and passage without debate.
Is it agreed? I hear a no. The notice is tabled. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And with your consent, I'd like to make an introduction to the West Gallery, if I could first.
Please do.
Seated in the West Gallery is a resident from my community, Mr. Avery Crawley from East Preston. And with him today is Gloria Wesley from Halifax. And I'd ask the House to give them a warm welcome today. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Avery Crawley is a resident of the community of East Preston and has for years enjoyed telling Bible stories through visual arts carvings such as Adam, Eve, the serpent in Eden, the Passion of Jesus Christ on the cross, and the sower parable. And whereas Avery Crawley has used his creative gifts and talents to express unique visual arts in wood carving, especially the roots of local Canadian trees, and has presented one of his uniquely carved walking sticks to the Governor-General of Canada on her most recent visit to Halifax. And whereas Avery Crawley's creative art includes walking sticks, talk sticks, shafts, rods, sculptures, and other works which have been widely collected locally, nationally, and internationally, and also have been on display on the 16th Annual Acadian Art Show at Acadia University recently. And a piece is currently on display at the Art Gallery of Nova Scotia named The Soul Speakers. Therefore, it be resolved that members of this House join me in recognizing Avery Crawley for his special talent and congratulate him on his recent successes and contributions as a Nova Scotia artisan, and wish him well in his future with his exquisite creations. And I'd ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The honourable member for Cape Breton West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, with your permission, I'd like to make an introduction.
Please do.
Mr. Speaker, through you and to all members of the House in the East Gallery, I'd like to draw your attention to Mr. Douglas Milborn. Doug operates a company in Sydney called the Advanced Glazings. Next to him is Steve Lilly. He operates a company called Photocase. These are two leading-edge companies in Cape Breton that have international recognition, and along with them is Mr. Mike Rutherham. So we'd like to welcome him. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Canada Atlantic Professional Photographers recently held a conference and competition in St. John, and whereas the conference held annually resulted in Warren and Catherine Gordon being recognized for their excellent photographic skills, and whereas Warren submitted 4 prints to the competition, with one being given an award of excellence for Best Pictorial Floral Photo, while Catherine received an award of merit as one of the 3 nominees for the Professional Photographers of Canada Photographer of the Year Award. Therefore, be it resolved, all members of this House extend our congratulations to both Warren and Catherine Gordon for their outstanding work and recognition by their peers at this annual conference. And Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the restoration and operation of the Fortress of Louisbourg was planned by the Government of Canada to sustain jobs in Cape Breton as the coal and steel industry wound down. And whereas the restoration of Louisbourg has proven to be a keystone tourist attraction as well as a major academic achievement. And whereas, although it has become even more difficult to keep families in Cape Breton, the federal government has proposed contracting out cleaning services at Louisbourg, which would eliminate reliable public sector jobs. Therefore, Mr. Speaker, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly urge the federal government to reconsider its plans to reduce the number of public service jobs at the Fortress of Louisbourg, keeping the fortress as a stable source of employment and a high-quality tourist attraction. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in 2004, 23 people each day were diagnosed with cancer in Nova Scotia. Whereas scientific evidence shows that deaths due to colorectal cancer can be reduced by as much as 17% if Canadians in senior age groups were tested biannually. And whereas this province has so far ignored the call by the Canadian Cancer Society to implement a screening program for that form of cancer. Therefore, be it resolved, members of the House of Assembly recognize March as Colorectal Cancer Awareness Month and offer our support to those who suffer with this debilitating disease. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Mike Topley was named Rotarian of the Year by the Truro Rotary Club at his 2007 Charter Night, which celebrated the club's 81st anniversary and the 102nd anniversary of Rotary International. Whereas Mike Topley joined the Rotary Club of Truro in 1997, later served as club secretary, in 2000 and 2003 was club president, and in the past year served on the Nomination Awards Subcommittee, on the Auction Subcommittee, and chaired the Yearbook Subcommittee. And whereas Mike Topley is one of only 2 members of the Rotary Club of Truro to have filled the 4 major roles as club secretary, auction chair, club president, and yearbook chair. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House congratulate Mike Topley on being recognized as Rotarian of the Year by the Rotary Club of Truro and thank him for his service to his community, province of Nova Scotia, and other countries through the Rotary Club of Truro. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Citadel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Khyber Arts Society is currently running a series of community consultations and events in order to develop a feasibility report on the future of the Khyber Centre for the Arts, and whereas the Khyber Centre for the Arts has operated under the direction of the Khyber Arts Society for more than a decade in the face of perpetual financial uncertainty and a lack of committed support from both the city and the province, and whereas multi-purpose, artist-run centres like the Khyber Centre for the Arts do so much to enhance the community's artistic and cultural life, as well as nurture new and emerging artists, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly recognize the widespread cultural, social, and economic benefits that art and cultural spaces bring to a community and applaud the Khyber Arts Society's efforts to ensure the long-term sustainability of the Khyber Centre for the Arts. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? I hear a no. The notice is tabled. The honourable member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Penny Laddock is one of Nova Scotia's most successful curlers, winning the 1983 Scott Tournaments of Hearts, numerous provincial women's championship, as well as mixed and senior championship. And whereas Mrs. LaRock has recently added to her trophy case with a recent 4th consecutive win of the Nova Scotia Senior Women's Curling Championship held in Bridgewater, and whereas Penny and her team, Mark Cutcliffe, Jane Arsenault, and Jill Linquist, will represent Nova Scotia from March 18th to the 25th of the Canadian Seniors Curling Championship in Trois-Rivières, Quebec. Therefore, it be resolved that members of this House recognize Penny LaRocque's remarkable curling career and wish her and her team every success as they represent our province. Mr. Speaker, I would ask.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice in future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Carolyn Hetherington of Ships Company Theatre gave a poignant portrayal of Lilibet in the production of Lilibet that garnered her the prestigious award for outstanding performance by an actress in a leading role, and whereas Ships Company Theatre 2006 productions took home 2 awards during the annual Robert E. Merritt Award ceremony on March 19th, and whereas because Carolyn Hetherington is currently touring with the play Half-Life, Artistic Director Pamela Halstead accepted the award on her behalf and spoke of Carolyn's gratitude for the opportunity to do what she loved to do in this beautiful province. Therefore, be resolved, all members of this House congratulate Carolyn Hetherington on this prestigious award, and we wish her continued success in all future endeavours. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and pass without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas $3.3 million in funding has been secured, plans are complete, and the opening of the East Dartmouth Community Centre is slated for January 2008. And whereas there is still the need to raise $500,000 for furniture and equipment, just to name a few items that will be necessary to offer quality programs and services to the community. And whereas donations can be made to the East Dartmouth Community Centre Campaign Fund by residents, community organizations, local businesses, and corporate partners. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the East Dartmouth Community Centre Fundraising Campaign Committee on their campaign Believe It, Build It, Experience It, and wish them much success in their future endeavours. And, Mr. Speaker, I would request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Digby Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Nova Scotia's coastal lands need protection from environmental concerns, and whereas the government recently purchased more coastal land for protection from industrial use, and whereas a beautiful peninsula in western Nova Scotia, much like the Florida Keys of the United States, may turn into an industrial gravel pit for the United States. Therefore, be it resolved that the members of the government investigate the possible purchase of some of Digby Neck and the islands for the protection from this needless destruction. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There has been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear a no. The notice is tabled. The Honourable Minister of Human Resources.
Do it again. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas communities across Nova Scotia are enriched through the work of volunteers, and whereas volunteers provide hundreds of thousands of hours per year sharing their time and skills, and whereas May Forbes of Bridgewater has been recognized as the Maritimer of the Week by ATV for her almost 70 years of volunteer work to the South Shore Regional Hospital in Bridgewater. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of the House congratulate 96 years young May Forbes of Bridgewater for her being named the Maritimer of the Week and for the countless number of hours she has donated and continues to donate to the South Shore Regional Hospital in Bridgewater. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favoor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Atlantic.
I give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas today, March the 22nd, is World Water Day, and whereas the international observance of World Water Day is an initiative that grew from the 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio de Janeiro, and where it is projected that by the year 2025, 1.8 billion people will be suffering from water scarcity, largely as a result of degradation, not loss of water. It is important that increased integration and cooperation must ensure a sustainable, efficient, and equitable management of scarce water resources locally and internationally. Therefore, be it resolved that this legislature recognize World Water Day and work to ensure sustainable, efficient and equitable management of Nova Scotia's own water resources. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Kings West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas more than 80% of new cars come with convenient power windows, and whereas few people realize that certain types of power windows pose a deadly danger and switches in many vehicles can be pushed by accident, especially by young children, and whereas in the last decade more than 30 children have been killed after getting trapped in a power window, and while some cars have auto reverse sensors installed, so if the window hits an object it automatically goes down, more vehicles should be required to have this safety feature. Therefore, be it resolved that members of the House of Assembly urge the government to communicate with Transport Canada to investigate the rising number of injuries and deaths caused by power windows and explore other means to prevent these incidents. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Halifax Regional Municipality fire emergency crews and volunteers quickly responded to an apartment complex fire on Tuesday, March the 13th, 2007. Whereas the fire caused extensive damage and resulted in the loss of one building at Piers Landing on Hammonds Plains Road in Bedford, the quick response by 60 HRM Fire and Emergency Services and HRM Police personnel prevented the loss of surrounding buildings. And whereas the HRM Fire and Emergency crews and HRM Police, along with the many volunteers and local businesses, helped prevent the loss of life and prevented injury to the residents and provided support to those affected by this crisis. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House extend their appreciation to these dedicated members of the HRM Fire and Emergency Services, HRM Police, and the many volunteers and businesses who responded to this tragic event. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Waverley, Fall River, Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas George P. Vanier Junior High School spelling champ Patrick Lecaire participated in the Can Spell Regional Spelling Bee at Dalhousie University in March 2007, and whereas 14-year-old Patrick won runner-up in the bee, competing against 38 regional spelling champs from across the province, and whereas Patrick will travel to Ottawa to compete in the Can Spell National Spelling Bee in April 2007, from which the winner will proceed to the prestigious Scripps National Spelling Bee in Washington, D.C. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Patrick Lecaire for his spelling prowess and provincial award, in which Patrick the best of luck at the Canadian National Spelling Bee in April 2007. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas International Women's Day has been observed since the early 1900s, recognizing the contributions women have made to society, and whereas over the past century women have made significant gains in the way in which they are able to shape our society, whether it be the struggle for the right to vote or striving for equal pay, women have fought hard to overcome adversity. And whereas women are underrepresented in both business and politics, and there is still a great deal of work to be done, therefore be it resolved that the members of this House of Assembly recognize the contribution women have made to Nova Scotia and the importance of International Women's Day. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Agreed? All those in favour of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my colleague, the MLA for Lunenburg, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Alec Ducksworth from Kingsburg, Nova Scotia, was part of the Nova Scotia snowboarding team at the 2007 Canada Games. Whereas Alex Duckworth received the gold medal in the half-pipe snowboarding event on February the 28th. Whereas Alec Duckworth's medal was the first for Nova Scotia during the Games. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly congratulate Alex Duckworth on her excellent performance at the 2007 Canada Games and on her receiving a gold medal for Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Sackville-Cobequid.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sackville hockey teams have had a lot of success with capturing provincial titles in the past, and whereas the Sackville Flyers Pee Wee AAA hockey team were very successful in many tournaments this year, finishing first place in the regular season league play, and whereas the Sackville Flyers Pee Wee AAA hockey team participated in this year's provincial championships in Sydney, Nova Scotia, and won the tournament to become provincial champions. Therefore, be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the players of the Sackville Flyer Pee Wee AAA hockey team on becoming provincial champions and wish them continued luck as they move on to represent our province at the Atlantic Championships in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on January 12, 1971, the North Preston Daycare Centre proudly opened its doors. And whereas this was the first black daycare centre in Halifax-Dartmouth area, providing a very necessary service for working parents in the community of North Preston. And whereas many parents felt more at ease to be able to drop off their children knowing that they would be lovingly cared for by members of their own community. Therefore, be resolved that members of this House of Assembly join me in congratulating the North Preston Daycare Centre Society for their hard work and dedication in running this centre and the difference they have made in the lives of children and the families of the community for the past 36 years. And I'd ask for waiver and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Oliver Murphy of West Chesuncook is retiring from his job in the unique profession as a grave digger with over 50 years of dedicated service to the Eastern Shore. And whereas Oliver Murphy, who dug his first grave at the young age of 14, went on to pursue a career in excavation business, thereby acquiring many skills, namely, as the dynamic person, most helpful when digging graves in our rugged Nova Scotia terrain. Whereas Oliver, a highly regarded gentleman, unassuming and modest by nature, has used his many talents throughout the years, demonstrating the utmost consideration, Mr. Speaker, for families involved by maintaining a respect for the deceased, as well as the grieving, while crafting final resting places for the recently departed. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House acknowledge and congratulate Mr. Murphy on a most well-deserved retirement. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Nova.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on February the 16th and 18th, the 2007 Canadian National Cadet Boxing Championships were held in St. Catharines, Ontario. And whereas 14-year-old Whitney Pier native Carl Campbell defeated Jermaine Chartrand in the semi-final in the 48-kilogram weight class. And whereas by doing so, Carl Campbell captured the silver medal in his weight division. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Carl Campbell on his silver medal win and wish Carl all the best in his boxing future endeavors. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas 11-year-old Nicholas Harvey of Concession participated in the NB Cup Mars/GMC Series in Edmundston, New Brunswick on January 20th, 2007. And whereas Nicholas competed in the downhill ski category of K1 for 11 to 12 years old slalom race, and whereas with a combined time of 1 minute and 30.41 seconds for 2 runs, Nicholas won a bronze medal. Therefore, be resolved that the members of this House congratulate Nicholas Harvey for winning a bronze medal in this competitive skiing event. And Mr. Speaker, I would ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the RRFB and the Valley Waste Resource Management are hosts of the Nova Scotia Recycles Contest for students from grades primary to 12 to help raise awareness about waste reduction and recycling in this province. And whereas Autumn Rayfuse is a student at the Northeast Kings Education Centre in Canning, and whereas Autumn Rayfuse was a winner of the contest in the Valley region, therefore be resolved that all members of this House recognize Ms. Rayfuse's interest and concern for the promotion of best practices for waste reduction and recycling in her community. I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. The motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Halifax Citadel on amendment request.
Yes. Mr. Speaker, with your indulgence and that of the House, I would like to reread the second whereas in my resolution on the Khyber Arts Society.
Is it agreed?
Whereas the Khyber Centre for the Arts has operated under the direction of the Khyber Arts Society for more than a decade in the face of perpetual financial uncertainty.
And the rest clauses remain the same?
Yes.
And you've requested waiver?
I request waiver of notice and passage without debate. With the
request for waiver is agreed. All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Garden of Eden Community Hall, for decades the community school, was incorporated in 1970s and has been operated by a group of dedicated volunteers for close to 40 years, and whereas the community hall is a vibrant part of the Garden of Eden, used regularly by the Women's Institute, seniors groups, youth groups, and for community events including those central to the Garden of Eden, Blue Mountain, East River St. Mary's. And whereas the community hall has been home for a well-attended summer recreation program, which has been part of the Garden of Eden community for more than 20 years. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly commend the volunteers for their dedication and eager contribution to the community of the Garden of Eden through the programming at and the steadfast use of the Garden of Eden Community Hall in historic Pictou East. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The Honourable Member for Digby, Annapolis.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas emergency rooms in the Digby General Hospital are frequently closed and local people are asking for a solution. Whereas rural doctors are becoming more and more difficult to find, and whereas Long Island, Digby County nurse practitioners are doing a wonderful job taking care of patients at a much smaller financial expense to the taxpayers, therefore be it resolved, Nova Scotia Department of Health help Digby General Emergency Room hire nurse practitioners to help our few existing doctors keep this service open. Mr. Speaker, I ask for waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waiver. Is it agreed? I hear no. The notice is tabled. The Honourable Member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the theme for Social Work Week, celebrated in Nova Scotia between March 4 and 10 this year, was social workers making a difference in children's lives. And whereas one exceptionally special group of social workers, understanding the significance even more of this year's theme, were the social workers at the IWK Children's Hospital. And whereas families from the constituency of Hants West and elsewhere across Nova Scotia and the Maritimes realize and appreciate the incredible support offered by the IWK social workers whenever it is required, on everything from travel assistance to teaching to facilitating bereavement support. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House applaud the contributions and monumental effort, sometimes through exceptional stress, put forward by social workers at the IWK on a daily basis. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Shelburne.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Stanley Greenwood of Cape Sable Island, Nova Scotia, has built 982 boats of various sizes and materials in the last half-century, and whereas Stanley went to work for his uncle, Joe Greenwood, in 1954 at the age of 17. Stanley learned the ways of boat building from his uncle and stayed with him until 1975. Wow. And whereas the first boat Stanley built on his own was in 1965, Stanley only needs to build 18 more boats to make it even 1,000. Wow. In Stanley Greenwood's words, retirement is not good for your health and well-being. Therefore, it be resolved that this House of Assembly congratulates Stanley Greenwood, commonly known as Chainsaw, on the amazing feat of building 982 boats and extends sincere wishes to Stanley on reaching his goal of 1,000 boats built. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the students of Pictou and Cumberland counties have entered the race to claim the title of Best Readers in the World, launched earlier this year. And whereas the young Nova Scotia readers will compete against children their own age from County Clare, Ireland, to read the most number of books per student. And whereas the winning school will be presented after the highest average number of books is calculated with 3,000 in new books for his library. The event is a result of the Pictou County RCMP Department's Adopted Library program that aims to combat youth crime by improving literacy skills. Therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House send their enthusiastic support to the young readers from Pictou and Cumberland counties as they compete for the title of the world's best readers. Encouraging such initiatives is another way to support the education of our young people and demonstrate their abilities on the world stage. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I should move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas on February 26, 2007, students took place in the DARE graduation ceremony of Atlantic Memorial School in Shad Bay. Whereas 25 graduates from the grade 5 class successfully completed the DARE program. And whereas RCMP Constable Mike Cochran and teacher Linda Joyce demonstrated professional leadership in providing this DARE course. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the students of the 2007 DARE graduation class from Atlantic Memorial School on their successful accomplishments. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Hants East.
Mr. Speaker, I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the fight against stroke and heart disease is waged not only by doctors, but also by our neighbours. And whereas volunteers assist the Heart and Stroke Foundation by canvassing for money for research to fight stroke and heart disease. And whereas Amy McClellan of Milford Station was recently awarded a golden pin by the Heart and Stroke Foundation of Nova Scotia for 25 years of door-to-door canvassing to raise funds.
Therefore, be it resolved, this House of Assembly congratulate Amy McClellan on receiving the Golden Pin Award by the Heart and Stroke Foundation and thank her for her continued fundraising efforts. And, Mr. Speaker, I request waiver notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Dartmouth East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas in December 2006, Eric Graves Junior High School donated over 800 non-perishable food items to the Nova Scotia Food Bank, and whereas the food was collected during a homeroom class collection competition during the last 2 weeks of school and during the school Christmas concert, and whereas there was also a silver collection during the school concert whose proceeds went to defray the costs of the sound system rental, with the balance of funds going directly to help support a needy family at Christmas. Therefore, be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate the students, teachers, and parents of Eric Graves Junior High School on their successful food drive and thank them for supporting the school and community in such a generous way. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Pictou East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the Westville Academy of Boxing was founded in February 2005 to provide wider training options for male and female youth interested in boxing. At present, enrollment is 27 youth from the ages of 10 to 18. And whereas Dukas Davis, 17 of Westville, recently won the Canadian Juniors Super Heavyweight title at the National Championship matches in Ontario, and whereas Dukas Davis was named Canadian Junior Male Boxer of 2007, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Dukas Davis on winning the National Super Heavyweight title and the title of Canadian Junior Male Boxer 2007. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Timberley Prospect.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I hereby give notice on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas Sir Johnny MacDonald students are raising funds for the Stephen Lewis Foundation Grandmother's HIV/AIDS Project in Africa, and whereas these students' efforts indicate their involvement and commitment, whereas all funds raised will go to assist the Grandmothers in Africa program, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate and thank the students of Sir Johnny MacDonald High School for their efforts to assist the Stephen Lewis Foundation for the HIV/AIDS Grandmothers Project in Africa. I ask for waiver and passage without debate, Mr. Speaker.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I hereby give notice that on a future day I shall move the adoption of the following resolution. Whereas the yurt has charms to lure the most die-hard couch potato, a fact well known to Jake Wenzel and Melissa Duggan. And whereas Jake and Melissa have worked as outdoor educators since their high school days and are now putting into practice everything they've learned, keeping cows and chickens, growing their own vegetables, and living in a teepee while they build their yurt to exacting Mongolian standards. And whereas Jake and Melissa are committed to minimizing their ecological footprint and teaching others how to do the same, therefore be it resolved that this House of Assembly congratulate Melissa and Jake on their enterprise, their cheese, butter, and eggs, their yurt, and their commitment to sharing with others the skills of living off the land. Mr. Speaker, I request waiver of notice and passage without debate.
There's been a request for waivers. Is it agreed? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Contrary, nay. Motion is carried. Orders of the day. Oral questions put by members. Question period will begin at 3:13 and end at 4:13. The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Ashley Kowaleski is pursuing her Bachelor of Public Relations at Mount St. Vincent University. Incidentally, Mr. Speaker, she's also the parent of a 7-month-old daughter. Ashley needs to complete just 4 courses to graduate, but student loans aren't enough, and she needs to have help with housing and childcare. When she contacted the Department of Community Services, she was told that she can't get help because she's in university and that she should consider community college. So my question to the Minister of Community Services is this: why does her department's programs remain out of reach for so many single parents attending university who need help?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services. Order, please. Order. While we welcome all our guests to the gallery today, you cannot respond either favourably or negatively to the activities in the chamber by the members. The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for the opportunity to rise and speak to this very important issue, Mr. Speaker. There's no question, Mr. Speaker, that we have a tremendous pool of talent and capability in the province, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to post-secondary training, we all know the importance and the success rates that go along with post-secondary education, Mr. Speaker. Within the Department of Community Services, of course, we have a variety of programs to assist our clientele with employment support and income assistance, Mr. Speaker, and we do a fine job, Mr. Speaker, of providing those resources to individuals who qualify for the programs that we offer. We also have the Department of Economic Development, the Department of Education, who also offer programs, Mr. Speaker, to individuals in need of assistance.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition, on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if the minister thinks her department is doing a fine job, she should talk to some of the people who really need help from her department and who aren't getting it. In this case, Mr. Speaker, Ashley has struggled in the face of the sudden death of her child's father, which necessitated her moving back to Nova Scotia, and she remains focused on completing her degree and providing for her child. She is so close. Yet, without a little help, she may not be able to complete her degree. The Career Seek pilot project for single parents in university is not an effective option for students in Ashley's situation. So my question to the minister is this: why not simply eliminate restrictions on university attendance altogether so that single parents can complete their degrees and still care for their children?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, it's my privilege to rise and speak about a few of the opportunities that we do have within the Department of Community Services, Mr. Speaker. Specifically, the very interesting and exciting project that we undertook with the universities across the province, Mr. Speaker, to provide for housing options for students, which was an initiative of this government, Mr. Speaker. Very pleased with that. As well, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member mentioned Career Seek. We will be putting 50 additional students in post-secondary university, Mr. Speaker, this fall. We're very pleased to be rolling that out and adding 50 to that for the next consecutive 4 years, for a total of 200 individuals, Mr. Speaker, who would not otherwise have qualified for post-secondary. And as well, Mr. Speaker, we also offer a variety of programs for our child care program, the program introduced by this government, Mr. Speaker, to better serve the needs of single parents and parents who choose to go to post-secondary education, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
You know, Mr. Speaker, I think the minister thinks she's speaking into a vacuum, that she can say whatever she wants, no matter how disconnected it is from the question, and as long as it sounds good, that's okay with her. She hasn't addressed this situation at all in the first two questions. So I'm going to try one more time to make her understand. Career Seek is a poor response to a poor policy of this government, a policy that should never have been put in place in the first instance. Restrictions on single parents pursuing university while retaining benefits need to be removed, period. So my question, Mr. Speaker, through you to the minister is this: when will this government ensure that students like Ashley can finish the program of their choosing while getting enough help to provide for their families?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Mr. Speaker, it gives me great pleasure to rise and respond to the member opposite that I'm sure the 200 individuals in the province of Nova Scotia who will be empowered by the Career Seek program and who will be able to go on and break the cycle, Mr. Speaker, and better provide for them and their families, indeed is a good program, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure those individuals are more than pleased with the initiatives of the Career Seek program, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Service, Nova Scotia Municipal Relations. Last month, the Affordable Energy Coalition released their report card, which rated the government's energy assistance program. The coalition gave the province a failing grade, Mr. Speaker, an F. An F for scrapping the Keep the Heat program and failing to replace it with any other program that would be targeted to low-income Nova Scotians. Low-income Nova Scotians are having difficulty heating their homes and keeping up with the high cost of heat. Many are being forced to make decisions between heat, food, and medicine, Mr. Speaker. It can't continue. My question for the minister is, in light of the failing grade, is your department looking at any alternative programs to help low-income Nova Scotians heat their homes?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, your energy rebate program is far-reaching, indeed does touch just about every family in this province with their home energy costs. Your energy rebate program, Mr. Speaker, has an annualized cost of somewhere around $75 million. It replaced a $18 million program annualized cost, and Mr. Speaker, it has had far-reaching benefits to families right across this province.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Clayton Park on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I'm surprised to hear the minister say that, in fact, he thinks these two programs are the same and that one replaces the other, because the Keep the Heat program was based on income, Mr. Speaker. It was designed to help people who cannot afford to heat their homes. The average amount of benefit from the HST reduction is $200 per family, and yet the amount that was given in a rebate under the Keep the Heat program was $250. So low-income Nova Scotians are receiving far less because they don't even get the average $200 savings. It's really a shame, and it's also irresponsible to leave people who are low income with no program to replace an $18 million program that helped people with a $75 million program. My question, Mr. Speaker, is to the minister, will you begin to consult with stakeholders now to immediately put in place an energy poverty reduction strategy with a focus on energy assistance for low-income Nova Scotians?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Mr. Speaker, one of the interesting things about the rebate program versus the program we have now, your energy rebate program, is that the take-up, to be quite frank, of the original program was very small. So I want to assure the honourable member and all members of this House that more low-income people in this province are benefiting from the current program than they did under the former program.
The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to note that in our constituency offices, people are calling this year asking how they can get their rebate from the Keep the Heat program. They're not aware that it's been cancelled, and they were counting on it to pay their heat this winter. And there have been many, many. And I think that the fact that if there was a slower or a smaller take-up, it was because the government didn't make it properly well known across this province. The $232,000 the government is spending this year on their slanted, one-sided political newsletter would provide more than 900 low-income Keep the Heat program recipients. Mr. Speaker, this government has misplaced priorities, and the people of the province deserve better. My question is to the minister, will you commit to bringing back the Keep the Heat program?
The Honourable Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to tell members of the House and to those that are viewing that about 40,000 home energy kits have been distributed to date to low-income households, 16,000 through the Housing Authority. You know, this government acknowledges that home residential energy costs are difficult for some people, and we are attacking the problem not only through Service Nova Scotia Municipal Affairs, but through the offices of my good colleague, the good Minister of Energy. Thank you.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question will be through you to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, last February, a 91-year-old British Columbia resident, Fanny Albo, died
2 days after being transferred from a hospital bed to a nursing home over an hour away. This transfer took place under BC's first available bed rule, which is identical, Mr. Speaker, to the 100-kilometre policy here in Nova Scotia. Just 2 weeks later, Fanny's husband of 70 years died. In the aftermath, changes were made to BC's first available bed policy, including the implementation of an appeals process. So my question to the Premier is this: why won't his government follow the lead of other jurisdictions and implement an appeals process for the 100-kilometre rule?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the Leader of the Opposition for the suggestion, and it's certainly one worth looking at, and we will give it consideration.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your first supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I hope the Premier understands that the reality is that the unspeakably cruel separation of senior couples happens in Nova Scotia on a regular basis. This government has simply had the great fortune to escape the kind of media firestorm that occurred in British Columbia. This doesn't diminish the impact of this policy on seniors and their families. 2 independent inquiries in BC concluded that the first available bed policy need review and an appeals process, and that better services were needed to be put in place for seniors. So my question through you, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier is this: when will Nova Scotia review its first available bed policy to ensure fairness for our seniors?
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, I will refer to the Minister of Health to update the Leader of the Opposition on the strategy in place.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And what I'll do is, put our continuing care strategy on the floor of the House, and I will talk about our expanded capacity, our supporting caregivers, our investing in human resources, our improving access to primary care, to delivering fair and timely care. And Mr. Speaker, I can say that on regular basis, we review the policy on placement, and as we said before, as we go forward with the construction of 832 beds, that we will ensure that people will be able to get services closer to home. But Mr. Speaker, we want to make sure that all patients and all seniors that are in our residences are able to get the safest care possible, which is why we continue to update our services and make sure we expand our services for all Nova Scotians.
The Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition on your final supplementary.
I think I put my finger on the problem, Mr. Speaker. The ministers talk, but they don't listen. Now, if they would listen to the questions that are being posed, then they would know that every time a senior is moved far away from their family and friends, in the final stages of life, it is a very personal tragedy for that individual and for their family. There are more humane, more compassionate ways to handle the overload in our long-term care system. We've suggested many of them. Measures, Mr. Speaker, that have worked in other jurisdictions. So, Mr. Speaker, through you, my question is to the Premier: how many more seniors and their families will be traumatized before this policy is phased out and an appeal process is put in place? How many more?
The Honourable the Premier.
Speaker, the Leader of the Opposition talks about listening. Obviously, he didn't listen to my first answer, and that is that the government is willing to listen to any ideas out there, and we will listen to that idea. We will take a look at it, take a look at the merits, as we do on a regular basis, to review the policy. But, Mr. Speaker, the fact is that we are not narrowly focused on simply beds in our province. We also want the opportunities for seniors in our province to have the opportunity through programs, through home care and such broad activities, to stay at home and to have that choice as well.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton Centre.
My question through you, Mr. Speaker, is for the Minister of Energy. The majority of people employed in Nova Scotia work for small businesses, Mr. Speaker, and there are huge opportunities for businesses to save money through efficiency programs. A recent report from Nova Knowledge found that Eco Efficiency Centre is one of Nova Scotia's best-kept secrets. This organization helps small businesses to conserve energy and therefore save money. But Conserve Nova Scotia, the minister's pin-up organization, has no business-focused programs on its websites. Not only that, it doesn't even advertise Eco Efficiency Centre. So through you, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the minister, can he tell me how he plans to help businesses conserve energy and therefore save money?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for the question. Conserve Nova Scotia is an agency designed and created by this government, and it is to require both individuals and private sector people to be more efficient. Mr. Speaker, we're moving along aggressively, approaching both business people and personal people to be more energy efficient. Mr. Speaker, throughout the next number of months, new programs are being presented to help both business and private people to be more energy efficient.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My first supplementary will be to the Acting Minister of Transportation and Public Works, because not only businesses are having a hard time conserving energy, but government is also, Mr. Speaker. The Nova Scotia government itself is a huge consumer of energy. The Department of Transportation and Public Works manages over 1,400 buildings on behalf of the government. That's a lot of light bulbs to change, Mr. Speaker. And we asked the department about their energy efficiency policies, and I would like to table the response which says, "We have located no records with respect to your request for policy documents concerning the promotion and implementation of energy efficiency activities in public buildings." So I want to ask the acting minister, would you like to, how much money is his department wasting every day by refusing to implement energy efficiency policies in government-run buildings?
The Honourable Acting Minister of Transportation and Public Works.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that's a good question and it deserves a good answer. And unfortunately, I don't have one right now. So what I would say to the member opposite is I will bring it to the attention of the minister and have him report back to the member opposite and to the House. Thank you.
The honourable member for Cape Breton Centre on your final supplementary.
I would like to thank the minister for his answer.
As brief as it was.
Mr. Speaker, my final supplementary goes back to the Minister of Energy. Speaker, promoting efficiency is the most cost-effective way to reduce our energy bills, because a kilowatt hour of energy saved is equal to the cost of one produced. Research from environmental organizations shows that energy efficiency programs can return $2 to $4 for every dollar that's spent, Mr. Speaker. Pilot programs and rebate schemes are all very well, but they're not going to make real changes in our energy consumption if it's just hot air, Mr. Speaker. So my question to the minister is, can he tell us how much energy Conserve Nova Scotia's programs have really conserved for this province this year?
The Honourable Minister of Energy.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very pleased to stand in my place and say that the Conserve Nova Scotia at this point is moving towards a success rate that's somewhat unbelievable. Mr. Speaker, every Nova Scotia is aware of Conserve Nova Scotia. Most Nova Scotians, if not all Nova Scotians, are aware of energy efficiency. And I want to tell you, Mr. Speaker, with the promotion and education, of Conserve Nova Scotia, involved in people saving energy will be very beneficial to all people in Nova Scotia, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage. Mr. Speaker, the Cape Breton Fossil Centre, located in Sydney Mines, has been virtually ignored by this government. The Fossil Centre is run by the Sydney Mines Heritage Society, which focuses on the local history and on the important role in which mining once played in the area. Mr. Speaker, the Fossil Centre has been in constant struggle with this government over operational funding. For whatever reason, this government has decided to neglect any and all financial obligations it has made with the centre, which are now resulting in closure in April. So my question is, why has the minister delayed funding to the Fossil Centre?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this department has never delayed funding to either museum under their care. The Museum Assistance Program, the Community Museum Assistance Program, funds both of those museums to the tune of about $17,400. We, through that fund, also fund 67 other museums in this province, or a total of 67, I should say, with a funding of $880,000. So that particular museum and it's through the Heritage Society receives more than their fair share under that program. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is a shame that this community-oriented heritage initiative will be forced to close its doors for reasons of political partisanship. This is ironic for a government that has been elected by rural Nova Scotia. Mr. Speaker, in 2006, a commitment was made on behalf of the provincial government to contribute $141,000 to both the Sydney Mines Heritage Museum and the Cape Breton Fossil Centre. The government has yet to act on that commitment. So my question is, will the minister honour that commitment and fund the Fossil Centre?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I've got to be quite honest with you and the member opposite. We have never received any official ask from the museum, from the Fossil Museum in Cape Breton for anything over and above what we've presented them through the Community Museum Assistance Program, which was $17,400. And as Minister of this department, and I was actually reviewing some correspondence today, I have never, ever seen any written requests through me or to any previous minister for $140,000.
Honourable Member for Annapolis, on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wonder if the member from that represents that riding ever speaks to the Minister of Tourism. It is clear that this government doesn't understand the importance of the Fossil Centre has been to the people of Sydney Mines and to Cape Breton. I will table letters that have been sent to us by grade 4 and 5 students, Mr. Speaker. Holly writes, "It is important we keep this part of our heritage so that young kids today and in the future can see it." Graham writes, "The museum attracts tourists, and when there are tourists, there are money and lots of it. I would suggest perhaps maybe there's a consultant on the way for the Department of Tourism, and he seems to understand it." And finally, Shannon writes, "Do you ever go and visit the Fossil Centre? Did you never? Do you never? You should, because you will probably change your mind." Mr. Speaker, it is clear that the Fossil Centre is extremely important to the residents of Sydney Mine. So my question is, will the minister do the right thing and keep the centre open?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism, Culture and Heritage.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's got to be clearly understood. By the way, it is the Department of Heritage that the funding comes from, not tourism. Mr. Speaker, on February the 21st, we were advised of the closure by the group in Sydney Mines. It was not the Department of Heritage that closed the museum. It was a choice made by the group in the area on their own. Mr. Speaker, we have supported, and we do support all museums in this province, the community museums, through the Community Museums Assistance Program. And we consider heritage in this province to be extremely important and value every community museum in this province. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and through you to the Minister of Health. The Aberdeen Hospital in New Glasgow is recruiting for 10 specialists at this time, and 2 of those required are internists. The hospital now has only 3 full-time internists, and they will only continue to work until June the 30th of this year. After that, many services could be closed or curtailed because there are not the necessary doctors to keep up with the job duties. And on February 6th of this year, my colleague from Pictou East and I wrote to the Minister asking what his department is doing to alleviate this very serious situation. So my question to the Minister, can you give us an update on the pending crisis at the Aberdeen Hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I can say over the last number of months, I've been working hard with the member for Pictou Centre and, of course, with the members opposite and trying to come up with some options for some of those replacements that he just talked about. But, Mr. Speaker, I can also say is that many regions are, of course, needing doctors, and, of course, we all compete on a Canadian context and, as a matter of fact, a North American context for physicians and specialists. And, Mr. Speaker, I know that over the last 18 months or so, we've been able to attract 188 new doctors to this province, and we'll continue to work with the District Health Authority to make sure that they have the complement of doctors that they do need.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on your first supplementary.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is a very serious situation, and without seamless coverage, the Aberdeen Hospital could be downgraded from a regional hospital to a community hospital. And that would mean the emergency department, general surgery, orthopedics, ICU could all be closed or at least severely curtailed. And this is unacceptable to the residents of Pictou County and to northern Nova Scotia. So my question again to the Minister, Mr. Minister, can you assure this House and the residents of Pictou County that the Aberdeen Hospital will receive the assistance it requires to remain a regional hospital?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I know the member opposite likes to talk about could or would or might, but I know that we are continuing to work with the District Health Authority to make sure that that site remains a regional hospital.
The Honourable Member for Pictou West on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is not about could, would, or should. It's a real, actual thing that's happening in the Aberdeen Hospital. And I think the government needs to make a commitment to providing a standard of internal medicine right across this province. If not, our healthcare system is going to fall apart. We don't want to see Aberdeen Hospital patients being moved to other hospitals in the area. So my final question, is the Department of Health going to ensure that the Aberdeen Hospital has adequate internists to serve Pictou County?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the member opposite knows full well from my meeting with him quickly yesterday, bringing him an update on how the recruitment process is going to find an internal medicine person or an internal medicine physician for the Aberdeen Hospital. As far as we know at this point, there are 2 possible candidates at this point. There are ongoing negotiations, and I will make sure that I keep the member opposite, as well as the member for Pictou Centre, as well as the member for Pictou East, aware of the situation as we expand the services at Aberdeen Hospital.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, on October 31st, 2005, the Minister of Health received a consultant's report on ambulance fees in Nova Scotia. This report was commissioned as a direct response to pressure from the NDP to address 6 specific aspects of the fee policy that resulted in terrible unfairness to Nova Scotians. But the Minister of Health sat on that report and sat on that report and sat on that report. Finally, Mr. Speaker, yesterday we received a copy of the report under the Freedom of Information Act a year and a half after it was handed to the Minister. My question to the Minister of Health, when will the Minister announce changes to the ambulance fee policy?
The Honourable, the Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knows full well that there are financial implications in that report, ones that will be taken under advisement, ones that we'll be bringing forward to Cabinet. And, you know, in the fullness of time, we will make sure that Nova Scotians receive the ambulance service that they do deserve, as well as a fair funding or fair charging system.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, I have read the report. There are no financial implications. There is a recommendation for a general increase in the fee, which we reject. All of the other changes to make the ambulance fee system more fair are revenue neutral. The consultant recommends a number of positive changes to correct unfairness in the ambulance fee system, such as for workplace injuries and for people who simply do not have the financial means to pay their ambulance bills. My question to the Minister, when will the Minister finally eliminate the unfair aspects of Nova Scotia's ambulance fee policy?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can again say to the member opposite that there are a number of issues that have to be further investigated. As a matter of fact, it needs to be brought forward to Cabinet for their second look as well. And Mr. Speaker, I will do that as soon as I can. Again, there are a couple of issues in there that do have financial implications, and of course, we're in the middle of a budgetary process.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Fairview on your final supplementary.
Speaker, I would understand if the Minister would need more time if he got the report last week or last month. He got it a year and a half ago. Every single person that I have helped to challenge their ambulance fee has seen the bill dropped completely by the Department of Health. Every single one without exception, Mr. Speaker. Surely that is the only confirmation we need that the department knows it is on shaky ground. Every day that goes by means more Nova Scotians get hit with unfair ambulance bills. My question to the minister, how can the minister justify his continuing inaction on the issue of restoring fairness to ambulance fees in Nova Scotia?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I just want to thank the member opposite for bringing this issue to the floor of the House. I can say that we are still looking at the recommendations. There are a number of recommendations that are held within that report that talk about increasing fees to some Nova Scotians. We want to make sure that we have the financial responsibility and the financial resources in order to not do some of those things. But, Mr. Speaker, we will be bringing that forward to make sure and continue to make sure that Nova Scotians have the best ambulance system in North America.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Minister of Community Service. I read a resolution in the House on Tuesday afternoon asking all members of this House of Assembly to call on this government to acknowledge the plight of the homeless and working poor in Nova Scotia and to take action in developing a poverty reduction strategy. The resolution received unanimous approval of the House. So my question to the Minister is, will your government respect the will of this House and address the issue of poverty through the creation of a poverty reduction strategy?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my honourable colleague for allowing me to rise today and certainly recommit the Premier's commitment to the people of Nova Scotia and the people of this House that indeed we are embarking on such a strategy, and we will continue to do so, Mr. Speaker, in the days to come.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis on your first supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The need for a comprehensive poverty reduction strategy before this province has been brought before this government on many occasions. A two-day poverty forum was held in January of 2006, where community groups and individuals shared their stories of living in poverty. The Liberal caucus listened to those individuals and brought forward a bill during the last fall sitting of the House of Assembly to strike a multi-departmental and community working committee to work in collaboration towards developing a poverty reduction strategy. So my question to the Minister, when will the multi-departmental and community representative working committee be assembled and given the task of creating Nova Scotia's first poverty reduction strategy?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And oftentimes in this House we find ourselves in a position where we can respond immediately to something, Mr. Speaker, and other times it takes a longer period of time. Certainly to the member opposite, this government is moving, has been moving, and will continue to move on the poverty reduction strategy. The member asks when, Mr. Speaker, we're doing it as we speak. And certainly we have lots of initiatives underway in the department, and we look forward to collaborating with stakeholders across the province as we move forward with that more collaborative, structured strategy in the days to come, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Annapolis on your final supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotia is a dedicated group of community representatives who are ready to get to work. We have the unanimous approval of members of this House that we should move forward on the initiative. What we need from this government is their political will. Will this government commit to a date when the people of Nova Scotia will have a poverty reduction strategy in place?
The Honourable Minister of Community Services.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And again, to my honourable colleague across the way, we make mention of interdepartmental cooperation and committees and groups working on strategies. And we've done that, Mr. Speaker. We've got economic development. We've got education in line with us, Mr. Speaker. And it certainly is my intention to bring a strategy forward, Mr. Speaker, in the very near future. And perhaps if we could get all of our stakeholders together and get some positive work together, Mr. Speaker, we could have it ready this fall, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question through you is to the Minister of Environment and Labour. Mr. Speaker, last November, the NDP caucus, in association with a number of public sector unions, called on the Minister to protect workers from the threat of violence in the workplace. Mr. Speaker, as you know, this is not a new issue. Nova Scotian workers and their unions have campaigned for legislation on this for more than a decade. On November 15th, just passed, the minister in this House said that the government would present its final plan in March of this year. Well, Mr. Speaker, there are now 9 days left in March, and there's still no plan. So I would like to ask the Minister, where is the promised plan on violence in the workplace to protect Nova Scotian workers?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you for the question. There are 9 days left in March, and the plan will be brought forth very, very soon.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your first supplementary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Well, Mr. Speaker, we all know that recent polling of public sector workers show that workplace violence is increasing in frequency and intensity. The NDP caucus recently gathered information on student suspensions in Nova Scotia schools, for example. And of the 3 school boards who record data on suspensions due to violence against teachers, there were 200 suspensions last year alone. That's only in 3 out of 9 boards, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask the Minister, in light of these worrying statistics, why is it taking so long to introduce regulations to protect Nova Scotian workers, such as teachers, from violence at work?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In the fall of this year, I met along with my colleague from the Minister of Education and colleagues from the Department of Health and colleagues from Department of Public Service with union leaders. We promised that we'd bring forth a strategy at that time at the end of March, and we are doing that. We've had consultation with Nova Scotians across the province, and so from the fall of this year to March is not, I would suggest, a long time. We realize the problem that teachers have, we realize the problem that health care workers have, and the Minister and myself are 100% committed to doing all we can to minimize workplace violence in the schools, in the health care centres, and in other institutions and businesses across this province. And I think when the plans come forward, I would hope that we would have the support of the parties opposite, because we're finally going to deal with workplace violence.
The Honourable Member for Halifax Needham on your final supplementary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the Minister. We'll be looking forward to scrutinizing that plan. But, Mr. Speaker, teachers and healthcare professionals, nurses, social workers, people in the public sector aren't the only workers who are impacted by violence at work. We all know that the private sector also is a place where workers can be subjected to a fair amount of abuse and violence. People who handle alcohol, taxi drivers, people in convenience stores, and throughout other parts of the private sector that often deal with the public. So my final question to the Minister is, will you commit that any legislation you bring forward this year will give the same protection to the private sector, the workers who are subjected to violence every day in some settings, as you will to workers in the public sector?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Labour.
Absolutely, Mr. Speaker. The member cites high-risk occupations that are targeted in the plan, that the International Labour Organization and occupational health and safety jurisdictions throughout North America have agreed are the prime victims of violence in the workplace, be they public sector or private sector. The only reason I mentioned the public sector was because the member opposite had raised the issue of the Department of Education's concern for teachers, and I wanted to highlight that the Minister of Education was 100% committed to working with my department to minimize workplace violence in that field. But people who work in convenience stores, taxi drivers, people who handle money, people who interface with the public and are victims of violence, this plan will be targeted for them as well as for people in public sectors, and I thank the member for the question.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay.
Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health. Mr. Speaker, Cancer Care in Nova Scotia's report on cancer rates in this province indicated that 23 Nova Scotians were diagnosed each day some form of cancer, and the numbers continue to rise. Over 27,700 are living with an invasive cancer diagnosis in this province. Prostate, lung, breast, and colorectal cancer accounted for the highest number of cancer diagnoses among both men and women. Cancer rates in Queens and Pictou counties are higher than in the rest of the province. The incidence of lung cancer in Cape Breton County remains disproportionately higher than anywhere else in this province. My question to the Minister, Mr. Speaker, is what solutions does the Minister's department have to reduce the number of cancer diagnoses in this province?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think that's the crux of the issue, to make sure that we find ways to make our population healthy, and trying to find ways to stop the incidence of cancer that happens far too often in our communities to family members and to friends. Mr. Speaker, which is why this government has taken the proactive step in setting up the office of, or the department now of Health Promotion and Protection, and I know there are a number of initiatives going on through that department, my esteemed colleague, the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection. But Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to in our department, the Department of Health, to provide services to make sure that we can help those individuals through their cancers.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, the Cancer Care report suggests that the decrease in certain forms of cancer, such as breast and cervical cancer, is due to an increased emphasis on screening programs. Scientific evidence shows that deaths due to colorectal cancer can be reduced by as much as 17%. But this province has so far ignored the call by the Canadian Cancer Society and Cancer Care Nova Scotia to implement a province-wide screening program for colorectal cancer and prostate cancer, the incident rates of which are on the rise. Mr. Speaker, my question to the Minister: will this government commit to the implementation of proven screening programs like colorectal screening and the improvement of existing screening programs in light of the recommendations that are set out in that report?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can say to the member opposite that we were very happy to receive the report from Cancer Care Nova Scotia and their recommendations on a colorectal screening program, and is one that, of course, through our budgeting process, that we have put that one up to get funded. Mr. Speaker, I look forward to a budget apparently this coming tomorrow.
The Honourable Member for Glace Bay on your final supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, simply put, this government's focus has been on treating cancer in the past rather than preventing cancer, and the government has to change that focus to prevention rather than treatment. My final question for the Minister then: what prevention programs will this government bring forward this year to reduce the incidence of cancer in this province and protect the sustainability of our healthcare system?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
I know there's a number of issues that my colleague, the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection, can answer on this issue.
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, to the member opposite, we have taken a number of initiatives to help reduce the prevalence of cancer in Nova Scotia, including our tobacco reduction strategy, sun-safe initiatives, and the use of new vaccines to help prevent Nova Scotians from cancer. I will say to the member opposite that these initiatives, many of them are new, they have shown great success, and we will continue to improve upon the initiatives that we have in place and build upon what we're already doing, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my question is for the Minister of Health Promotion and Protection. In 2006, as a pre-election announcements, the government released a number of money envelopes to various recreation facilities around the province. This money was to be dedicated to facility improvements, equipment purchases, and similar expenses. My question to the Minister: when can Waverley Fall River Beaverbank expect some provincial money to assist with the construction of the soon-to-be-built recreation center in Fall River?
The Honourable Minister of Health Promotion and Protection.
Mr. Speaker, the project that the member opposite is speaking about was applied for under the Canada-Nova Scotia Infrastructure Program, and that would be the Minister of Service Nova Scotia and Municipal Relations who is responsible for that program. But I'm pleased to say to the member opposite that we have invested in hundreds of facilities across this province. We've increased our budget by 100%, and we will continue to work to ensure that recreation and physical activities facilities are available for all Nova Scotians so that we can work towards becoming the healthiest and safest province in this country, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Waverley Fall River Beaverbank on your first supplementary.
Mr. Speaker, communities all across the province are receiving sports and recreation infrastructure money for equipment, upgrades, uniforms, and other necessary investments. The Department of Health Promotion and